On the night of December 26, 1985, Whitley Strieber found himself in the middle of an experience so unsettling, so otherworldly, that it would forever change the way he viewed reality. Picture this: a quiet night, the kind most people would peacefully in their homes, tucked in for rest, but for Whitley, that night was not destined for rest. It was the night he woke in the middle of a nightmare, not just a run-of-the-mill bad dream, but a terrifying, unexplainable encounter that would later become the basis for his famous book, Communio. Imagine, if you will, lying in your bed, drifting in and out of sleep, when suddenly you are jerked awake. Only you are not in your room anymore. Instead, you are in a strange, dark space, surrounded by figures unlike anything you've ever seen. They are not human. They don't look anything like what you'd imagine. If you were told to picture a creature from another world, the fear surges in your chest and your mind races. What is happening? Are you dreaming? Are you awake? And most importantly, are you alone as your eyes try to adjust? You see them, beings with large, black eyes that seem to pierce through the darkness. They are not quite like anything your mind can grasp, yet they are undeniably real for Whitley. This was the reality he was facing that night, but it was only the beginning. At first, his mind struggled to comprehend what was happening. It didn't even occur to him that he had been abducted by extraterrestrials. Oh, he believed he was simply trapped in a nightmare, so vivid, felt almost tangible. But when he tried to scream, to fight, to break free from the strange paralysis, he realized he couldn't. It was like being frozen in time, helpless, in the face of something far beyond his understanding. There was no escape. But this wasn't some abstract feeling of dread. Oh, this was real. These beings, these visitors, as Whitley later referred to them, were not figments of his imagination. They were standing there in his face, doing things to him he couldn't yet understand. Whitley wasn't sure if he was dreaming or awake. He was sure that something extraordinary and utterly terrifying was happening to him. His body was being assaulted in ways he could not explain. An object, which he later believed to be some sort of device, was placed near his head, injecting him with something that made him feel as though he were losing control of body at the same time. Something even more personal, even more intrusive took place, and Whitley was left with the after effects of an experience so alien to him, so far outside the realm of what any human could comprehend, that it sent him spiraling into a deep sense of confusion and fear. When the morning came and Whitley woke up in his bed, the remnants of that night clung like a shadow. His mind couldn't make sense of what had occurred. His body felt different, changed in a way he couldn't put into words. Was it just a nightmare, or had something far more sinister happened to him? The guilt of not remembering, the disbelief, the confusio. These feelings washed over him in waves, but one thing was undeniable. He had experienced something real, something terrifyingly real. What followed next wasn't a simple search for answers. Oh, it was a journey into the unknown, into a world that Whitley had never once thought possible. He began asking questions, trying to make sense of his experience, but the answers didn't come easily. A doctor confirmed the oddities in his physical condition, certain medical findings that he couldn't explain, then a random encounter with a UFO researcher. And Bud Hopkins led him down an even stranger path. This was no ordinary man. Bud Hopkins was a well-known figure UFO in the community, someone whose work centered around uncovering the truth behind strange, unexplainable experiences like Whitley. Skeptical as he was, Whitley found himself in a small office in Manhattan, meeting with Hopkins and eventually being guided toward Dr. Donald Klein, a respected forensic hypnotist. It was here in Dr. Klein's office where Whitley's world was turned upside down. What had seemed like a fragmented memory, a disjointed nightmare, suddenly began to take form under the power of hypnosis. The details of his abduction, his contact with the visitors, came rushing back to him like a flood of terrifying images. In that moment, something shifted inside Whitley. What he had thought were mere dreams revealed to be something far more tangible. These beings were real. They weren't figments of his imagination. They had come for him and they had done things to him that no human should ever have to endure. The shocking truth left him breathless. When he walked out of Dr. Klein's office that day, he was no longer the same person who had walked by. This moment marked the beginning of Whitley's new reality. Don was the man who believed UFOs and extraterrestrial life were mere fantasies. He was now someone who had first-hand knowledge of their existence. His life would never be the same again, and neither would his sense of self. He had to ask himself, what did this mean? What was the purpose of these visitors? And more than that, how had this encounter altered the very fabric of his existence? As he began to piece together fragments of his memories, the truth became undeniable. He was no longer just a mob experiencing a strange event. He had become part of something far larger, something otherworldly, beyond anything he could have ever imagined. His understanding of the universe, of life and death, of everything he thought he knew about the world was shattered. What would you do if you found yourself in a situation like Whitley's? What if you woke up one day only to discover that things you once thought impossible were not only possible, but they were real? How would it feel to face something so profoundly unsettling, something so utterly beyond the realm of human experience? For Whitley Strieber, this wasn't just a thought experiment. It was a terrifying reality. And for him and many others like him, it was a reality that he could no longer escape, no matter how hard he tried. The experience left Whitley with more questions than answers. And as he continued his journey into the unknown, it became clear that this was just about finding out what happened to him. It was about confronting the essence of what it means to be human, to be alive, and to be connected to something far greater. Ourselves, what was the purpose of these visitors? What did they want? What was their message for humanity? And most importantly, what would it mean for our future? As we sit here today, years after Whitley's first encounter, these questions remain as relevant as ever, and as more people come forward with their own strange, unexplained experiences. It seems that the truth is still out there, waiting to be discovered. Perhaps it's time we all start asking ourselves, what if the answers are closer than we think? What if the world we live in is not as simple as we once believed? And most intriguingly, what if we're not alone? In the stillness of the night, a man found himself awakened by an eerie presence, one that would change the trajectory of his life. Whitley Strieber, a prolific author known for his work in fiction, had lived a fairly quiet life until the fateful night in December of 1985. The experience that he was about to encounter would not only challenge everything he had ever believed, but it would also thrust him into a world of the inexplicable, a world that many would dismiss as fantasy, but one that Strieber knew all too well as reality. In the early hours of that night, Whitley woke up suddenly in a small, dimly lit room. It was an experience he would later describe as terrifying and surreal. The room was filled with what appeared as nightmare creatures, their forms shifting and flickering like shadows, yet their eyes large and dark, locked onto his in a way that was both unsettling and hypnotic. These beings were not of this earth, and their presence was undeniable. In that instant, the world as Whitley had known it began to unravel. The creatures, with their unsettling silence, communicated in ways he could not fully comprehend. The fear that gripped him was unlike anything he had ever known. And yet, somewhere deep within, there was an undeniable feeling that this encounter was meant to be. At that moment, Whitley did not fully understand what was happening. He didn't think of abductions or extraterrestrial visitors, no. At first, he thought it was simply a nightmare, one of those deeply unsettling dreams that fade with the morning light. But as the minutes passed and the sensations and images stayed with him, he realized this was no ordinary dream. It was real. His mind raced with thoughts. Yet he was paralyzed with fear. He couldn't move. The beings around him seemed to be studying probing him in ways that left him feeling violated, helpless, and utterly exposed. The sensation of a needle pressing into the side of his head was one of the tangible memories that came to him. The pain was sharp, almost unbearable, and yet there was an eerie calm that accompanied it as the moments stretched. Another horrifying event unfolded, an experience so intimate and it left Whitley shaken to his very core. He was subjected to a machine that seemed to cause a physiological response that he could neither control or comprehend. There was no pleasure, desire, only a mechanical, detached activity that left him feeling numb and powerless. When Whitley awoke the next morning in his bed, everything seemed normal at first. The daylight filtered softly through the windows, casting a gentle glow on the room. But inside Whitley was a man forever changed. The sense of dread, the feeling of something not quite right lingered. Refusing to let go, he thought he had seen an owl in his house during the night. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that it wasn't just the owl that troubled him. It was the larger, more haunting reality. The realization that what he had experienced was real, not a dream. Over the next several weeks, Whitley grappled with the aftermath of his encounter. He felt the weight of confusion and disbelief bearing down on him what had really happened. Was he truly the victim of an alien abduction, or had his mind simply played tricks on him? These questions swirled in his mind as he sought answers in places he never thought he would turn to. He went to his doctor, who told him that there were signs of physical trauma, including a lesion near his rectum. The medical professional was puzzled, unable to explain the nature of the injury. Desperate for answers, Whitley took the next logical step. He reached out to authorities, contacting the Criminal Investigation Division, thinking perhaps he had been assaulted in some way. It wasn't until Whitley found himself staring at a UFO book gifted to him by his brother, his mind began to open to the possibility of extraterrestrial involvement. The name Bud Hopkins appeared in the back of the book, and Whitley felt an eerie pull toward him. Hopkins, a well-known UFO researcher, had documented similar experiences in his work, and Whitley's intuition told him that this might be the key to understanding what had happened to him. With skepticism lingering in the back of his mind, he contacted Hopkins. The skeptic in him still didn't want to believe, something inside him that he was on the brink of uncovering far bigger than he could comprehend. Through Bud Hopkins, Whitley was introduced to Dr. Don Clay, a leading forensic hypnotist expert in abduction cases. At first, Whitley was reluctant. Hypnosis was not something he believed in, but after much coaxing and with his wife by his side, he agreed to undergo hypnosis with Dr. Clay. What followed was an experience that would forever alter Whitley's perception of reality. The memories that surfaced during the hypnosis sessions were unlike anything he had ever imagined. They were vivid, intense, and above all undeniable. Whitley realized that the creatures he had encountered were not figments of his imagination. They were real, and the events that transpired were not just a product of a nightmare. In the weeks that followed, Whitley's life began to change in profound ways. He went through a process of self-discovery, grappling with the intense emotions that came with realizing the truth about his abduction. There were moments of fear, moments of confusion, but also moments of clarity. For the first time, he understood that these visitors, these beings from another world, were not just figments of his imagination or a product of a misfiring mind. They were real, and their presence on Earth was part of a larger, far-reaching plot. In his quest for answers, Whitley began to seek out others who had experienced similar phenomena. Through Bud Hopkins and others in the UFO community, he began to connect with people who had also encountered these visitors. These individuals shared their own stories of abduction, and for the first time, Whitley felt less alone. The fear he had felt was not unique to him. It was a shared experience that found them all together. He attended meetings where he met other close encounter witnesses, and over time, the understanding that he wasn't the only one to have such experiences began to take root. Despite the terrifying nature of his encounters, Whitley also began to question what the visitors wanted. Why were they here? What was their purpose? It became clear to him that their presence on Earth was not random. It was deliberate. Over the years, Whitley continued to have contact with these visitors, often in ways that were subtle, almost imperceptible. He began to venture into the woods near his cabin, where he had first encountered them. In an effort to reconnect, the woods, dark and ominous, became a place where he would meditate, hoping to establish a line of communication. There were times when the visitors seemed to respond, but not always in the ways Whitley expected. The relationship between Whitley and the visitors evolved over time. It wasn't a relationship built on fear alone. There were moments of connection, of understanding, of telepathic communication that defied explanation. The experiences he had in the woods, coupled with his growing awareness of the visitor's nature, began to shift his perspective. He realized that they were not all-knowing gods, or were they necessarily hostile. They were something else, something entirely different from anything he could have ever imagined. And yet, there was still fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of being vulnerable in the presence of these beings. But beneath that fear was a deeper truth. Whitley was not alone. These visitors, however enigmatic and otherworldly, were not trying to harm him. They were simply trying to communicate, to make contact, to help humanity see the universe in a different light. And in their own strange way, they were teaching him more about himself than he ever thought possible. For those who have never experienced such a phenomenon, it is easy to dismiss these encounters as fantasy. But for Whitley Strieber, the experiences were not just a matter of belief. They were a matter of lived reality. And in that reality, there was fear, but there was also hope. There was confusion, but there was also a sense of purpose. Through his encounters with these beings, Whitley had unlocked a door to a world that most of us can only dream of. And in doing so, he had begun a journey that would take him to the very heart of what it means to be human. A life changed the journey from fear to understanding. It was the winter of 1985, and the quiet of a remote cabin in the woods of upstate. New York had always provided Whitley Strieber with the peace he longed for. Yet one night, that peace was shattered in a way he could never have imagined. Strieber, a successful author at the time, woke up in the dead of night to a chilling realization. The experiences he had encountered were not just bad dreams, but a confrontation with something entirely real. A reality that would forever alter his perception of life and the world around him. What followed in the years to come was a journey just into the unknown, but into the depths of the human spirit, grappling with fear, doubt, and ultimately hope. For many people, experiences like these might be too much to process. Most would shut down, retreat into the safety of the know. But Strieber's story took a different path. The realization that his experience was real ignited a spark in him that would become the cornerstone of a new worldview. What had once been just an unsettling event soon became a pivotal moment in his life, a moment that changed everything, from how he viewed the world to how he would come to see himself. The immediate reaction, however, was not one of clarity. Whitley didn't immediately embrace the idea of extraterrestrial beings. Instead, there was a period of disbelief. He sought answers, trying to understand the inexplicable events that had left him terrified and confused. For weeks after the incident, he struggled with the aftermath, trying to make sense of his experiences. His mind wandered between denial and the uncomfortable truth that what he had witnessed couldn't be explained by anything he knew. To make matters worse, he had a hard time finding anyone who could empathize with what he was going through. But the experience didn't just leave him in fear. It started a process, a search for truth that would take him down unexpected paths. His need for understanding led him to a decision that became a necessary one. He would face what happened head-on, no matter how absurd or terrifying it seemed. The path he embarked upon, while filled with obstacles, also brought him closer to a truth that many people today still grapple with. Whitley's journey is one marked by one central personal transformation. The idea that what happens to us doesn't necessarily define us, but how we respond to it does. The terrifying experience he had wasn't just a traumatic event. It was a turning point that propelled him into a deep search for meaning, understanding, and truth. It was through this exploration that he began to embrace a reality far beyond the familiar world he once knew. The boundaries of his previous understanding of existence began to erode. It was the first time in his life that he questioned everything he had ever known. Many people, especially as we grow older, tend to rely on the familiar to give us comfort. As we approach retirement age, we often find ourselves seeking more stability and less upheaval. We've built lives filled with routines, expectations, and a sense of safety. Change becomes something we resist because it brings uncertainty. Yet Strieber's story shows us that sometimes, even in our later years, we are pushed into change whether we like it or not. And while that change may bring fear, it also opens doors to profound ways of seeing the world. One of the most striking aspects of Strieber's journey was the way in which it challenged him to confront his own fears. He could have easily chosen to ignore the experience, to bury it under the weight of societal norms, reject the idea of alien encounters. But instead, he allowed himself to delve into the uncomfortable, exploring the very nature of the unknown. This is where the curiosity came high. His mind started to explore possibilities that had previously seemed unthinkable. What if the beings he encountered weren't just figments of his imagination? What if there was something real, something bigger than he could have ever anticipated, operating beyond the confines of human understanding? In the years that followed, Strieber's perspective on life began to shift in ways that most people would find hard to comprehend. He wasn't simply trying to make sense of the event itself. He was re-examining everything he had ever taken for granted. For someone who had once lived in the comfortable realms of logic and rationality, the possibility that there were forces and beyond human comprehension was nothing short of groundbreaking. And this realization was both inspiring and terrifying. But it wasn't just fear that accompanied this journey. Strieber began to understand that these beings were extraterrestrial invaders, but visitors. His worldview began to open up in ways he hadn't expected. He found hope in this new reality. There was an undeniable sense of freedom in discovering that there were vast dimensions to existence, things far beyond the physical we can see and touch. This knowledge wasn't just intellectually stimulating. It sparked a deeper spiritual awakening, offering him the possibility that there was more to life than the day-to-day concerns that often weigh heavily on us. One of the most powerful realizations Strieber had was that there was much more to life than simply what we see in front of us. His experiences pushed him to look beyond the boundaries of ordinary reality. And this process of questioning, of delving deeper into his own mind and soul, was liberating. It wasn't about proving something to the world. It was about uncovering the truth within himself. There was a great sense of self-discovery that came with the shift. It was a journey that helped him reconnect with parts of himself he hadn't known existed. For Strieber, his personal transformation came with a profound sense of to something larger than himself. He began to see that these beings, the visitors, weren't just outside forces imposing themselves on humanity. They were participants in a larger cosmic order, one in which he himself was now a part. And this realization had a ripple effect on his understanding of death, the afterlife, and what it means to be human. He started to see death not as an end, but as a transition. This understanding gave him a sense of peace he had never felt before. However, this sense of peace didn't come easily. It was a journey that took Strieber through fear, disbelief, confusion, and ultimately acceptance. It was only after going through these emotional stages that he began to understand the importance of his experiences. They weren't just about him. They were about the potential of all humankind to change and to embrace the unknown. Strieber's story offers a powerful reminder, no matter how old we are, it's never too late to challenge our own beliefs, to question the assumptions we've held on to, and to embark on a journey of self-discovery. This journey of transformation and growth is one that resonates with many of us, especially as we grow older. For many, aging can feel like a process of losing things: our health, our strength, our energy. But Strieber's story reminds us that even in the face of such losses, there are opportunities for great gains. The loss of physical abilities may limit us, but it can also open up the possibility of a deeper, more meaningful connection to the world around us. Strieber's shift in worldview wasn't just about encountering alien beings. It was about facing the unknown, embracing it, and ultimately discovering a deeper connection to life itself. It was about the courage to confront and transform it into hope, to take a leap into the unknown and trust that it would lead to something greater. History teaches us that the greatest discoveries often come when we step outside of our comfort and open ourselves up to the mysteries of the universe. For anyone, but especially for those of us in our later years, Strieber's journey is a reminder that life is not static. We are not bound by the limits of what we know. As we age, it is easy to think that the best parts of life are behind us. But Strieber shows us that the most profound experiences often come when we least expect them, when we are willing to take risks, face our fears, and embrace the unknown with an open heart. In the end, Whitley Strieber's transformation is a testament to the power of curiosity, the courage to confront our deepest fears, and the freedom that comes from embracing the unknown. His journey invites us to look beyond the visible world, to question our assumptions, and to realize that no matter our age, we are always capable of growth, discovery, and transformation. In the late 1980s, Whitley Strieber, a successful author with a taste for fiction, found himself thrust into a world he could never have imagined. It was not the realm of fantasy he was accustomed to, but a chilling and confounding reality. His 1987 memoir, Communion, became a groundbreaking narrative, unraveling not only his personal encounters with beings from another world, but also the broader implications of such an experience. What followed was a journey into the unknown, one that would change not only Strieber's life, but also the lives of countless others who came to believe his extraordinary story. This book did not just document an encounter. It ignited a firestorm of curiosity, skepticism, and reflection on the possibilities of life beyond our own. Writing Communion was not an easy decision for Strieber. In fact, there was nothing particularly easy about the process, considering the overwhelming emotions and the intense backlash he faced. But one thing was clear: the experience he had undergone was profound, and he felt the deep, almost visceral need to share it. Whitley was well aware of the skepticism that would follow. In fact, the very idea of publishing a book on his encounter seemed outlandish. The world was not ready for such a revelatio, but even in the face of ridicule, he found the courage to expose his truth, and Communion became his vehicle for doing so. The catalyst for writing the book was the need to make sense of what had happened. To him, his encounter, which had initially terrified him, left behind more than just a sense of fear. It sparked a profound sense of urgency within him, a feeling that he could not ignore. Strieber wasn't just going to sit in silence with his experience. He felt compelled to make the world see. And so, the book began. At first, Whitley had no idea how Communion would be received. He was simply sharing the story of his life-altering experiences. Strieber was not trying to start a movement or create a sensationalized narrative. He wrote from a place of raw honesty, detailing what he remembered, what he felt, and what had truly happened in those moments. The book was meant to be a simple telling of the truth, nothing more, nothing less. He thought only a handful of people, those who shared similar experiences, would read it and resonate with his journey. How wrong he was. When Communion hit the shelves, Strieber was taken aback by the immediate, overwhelming response. The book sold unexpectedly well, and it wasn't long before it made waves, particularly in the United States. The public's interest was piqued, because of the usual subject matter one might expect in the genre of alien encounters, but because of the sheer vulnerability and earnestness in Strieber's writing. It was an emotional roller coaster, a blend of fear, confusion, and hope. The readers, many of whom were in search of answers to their unexplainable experiences, were drawn to Strieber's story. They found his honesty compelling. They too began to question the world they lived in. But with the book, success came the inevitable backlash. In an age when discussions about extraterrestrial life were largely confined to science fiction, Strieber's story opened up a realm of possibility that the majority of the public was not prepared for. It was one thing to read about UFOs and aliens or on television. It was another to face them head-on in a personal account written by someone who seemed so normal, so ordinary to many. It was unfathomable. The media, ever suspicious, began to mock him. They were quick to label him as someone who had been consumed by delusions, a victim of vivid nightmares, or at worst a man seeking fame at any cost. For Strieber, this scrutiny was painful. To have his most personal and terrifying experience ridiculed was a constant source of anguish. Yet, despite the ridicule, Strieber continued on with his missio. He began a nationwide book tour promoting Communion and sharing his story with anyone willing to listen. It wasn't easy. The questions he was asked were not ones of empathy or understanding. Instead, he faced harsh inquiries, mocking comments, and even outright hostility. It wasn't just the media, even other authors, researchers, and intellectuals within the UFO community were divided. Some believed his experience, while others outright rejected it. It was, and still remains, a topic fraught with controversy. And yet, Strieber could not let go. There was a deeper sense of responsibility. He felt this wasn't just his story to tell anymore. It was a story that belonged to many. His encounters resonated with others who had similar experiences, and they too felt an unspoken connection to the events he described. They found solace in his words, as though they were no longer alone in their experiences. This sense of solidarity became a driving force for Strieber through his own through his own vulnerability. He was providing a voice to those who had never dared to speak out. The emotional depth of Communion lies not only in the descriptions of his extraterrestrial encounters, but also in the way Strieber about the emotional toll it took on him. As he writes about the alien beings, there is a palpable sense of loneliness, and in his voice, his struggles with the idea of whether these beings are benevolent or malevolent. The horror he felt during the initial abduction, but the wonder and curiosity that gradually replaced it. Was this duality that made Communion so compelling. Strieber wasn't just telling a story of fear. He was telling a story of growth, of evolving from someone who was terrified of the unknown into someone who could begin to embrace it. The backlash that followed the publication was not something Strieber had anticipated, but over time, he came to understand that it was larger narrative he had unwittingly entered into. What was once seen as a fringe, even absurd subject, was now a topic that demanded attention. As more people read his book and others began to come forward with their own experiences, a larger conversation began to unfold. The alien encounters that had been ridiculed were now taken more seriously, at least by a growing number of individuals. The stigma surrounding these topics was starting to break down, albeit slowly. Strieber's decision to write Communio not only affected his life, but also catalyzed an entire movement. His honesty about his experiences, his willingness to stand by his truth despite the ridicule, paved the way for other individuals to share their own stories without fear of judgment. It gave them the space to reflect on their encounters, to talk about them openly, and to find community in the process. Through Strieber's words, a sense of unity formed, one that transcended skepticism and embraced the idea that there was something larger at play in the universe than anyone had ever dared to imagine. What makes communion so is powerful not just the story itself, but the way it challenges its readers to confront their own understanding of reality. Strieber does not offer definitive answers, conclusive evidence. Instead, he presents his experiences in a way that is deeply personal, yet universally relevant. He invites readers into his world, a world where the lines between the known and the unknown, where science fiction and reality intersect. For many, communion represents not just a personal encounter with the extraordinary, but a reflection on the very nature of human existence. In our place in the cosmos, writing Communion was a brave act, one that required Strieber to not only confront his own fears, but also to take a stand. In a world that was not yet ready for his truth, his willingness to share his story changed the conversation about extraterrestrial life, inviting both wonder and skepticism. And while the world may still grapple with the ideas and questions Strieber erased, Communion remains an essential part of the ongoing discussion about the unknown. It is a reminder that sometimes the most profound truths are the ones that push us out of our comfort zones, challenge our beliefs, and ultimately leave us with more questions than answers.